What is up, YouTube? Keith here from Cutlass Board Games, and one of the things that I like to do as a game designer to try and keep my skills sharp, as it were, is to have a look at existing games that I've played or I do enjoy and try and find what I think works, what I think doesn't work, how I want to change things, and see if maybe I want to do like a reboot or rebuild or have a bit of a tinker around on how some things work. And Diablo 2 was probably one of the first games that I really got into. I've played easily over 1,000 hours of this game. And I came back to it recently with the big launch of Resurrected. And I was thinking a lot about some of the design ideas that came into building the skill set for the sorceress class, being my favorite class, has the most utility. And I wanted to go, what if I just had a look at everything? What if I just went and redid the whole thing from scratch, trying to keep some of the core design ideas that they had? What kind of things would I change? What kind of things would I put together? And so that's what we're gonna have a quick run through here. What if we rebuilt the sorceress class from the ground up? So I set myself some design goals. Starting off, pretty much every single skill has a secondary ability that says this other skill deals more damage. Like for example, Frost Orb says for each point that you have in Ice Bolt, it gets extra damage. And that just basically says I'm encouraging you to use this particular part of the skill tree, and it sort of informs how you're going to be designing your journey through the skill tree and how you're going to be building your character. The next thing is to make the end of the skill tree make you feel more powerful rather than just do bigger numbers. Like all of the, like you hit level 20, level 30, you kind of like hit the end of your first run, right? You get your big, your big level skill like Frost Orb. And then after that is just the mastery, and the mastery just gives you a % bonus to damage and nothing else. And it's really anticlimactic in a way, where you're like, there's a whole 20 levels of here, or I'm just getting extra numbers bigger, and it doesn't make me feel more powerful. So I kind of wanted to rebuild some of that, and then make some of the unused skills feel more useful, even if it's just for one skill point. So some of this exists already, where you would toggle to a different skill for a specific utility. For example, static kind of does that sometimes. When people are fighting bosses, like, I'll switch to static, I'll start the fight with a lot of static, and then we'll switch to my actual damage skill. Same as teleport. Teleport, like, we'll just always get one skill point, and then you would never put anything else into it because it just reduces the mana cost. But the other thing is, we're not going to look at damage numbers or mana numbers, how much it costs to cast something, because that's something that's balanced through testing, not through briefs. Like if I said this is what I'm going to change, and then you put it into testing, it's going to be completely different, like instantly. So there's not really much point in that. So let's get started with lightning skills. So we're going to do each one by one. We're going to run through what all of the changes that I would do to change the skills. Starting with Charged Bolt. So Charged Bolt is something that I think is really cool in the base game, but it gets like dropped almost immediately. And I've seen a few mods that have done stuff like Charged Bolt Mastery, or things that allow you to really engage more in Charged Bolt. And what I wanted to build around the lightning kind of skill tree was casting on hit. When you're like on monster hit, casting more copies of your spells. So Charge Bolt, when you use the spell, you create X bolts, and that will scale up as you level. Exactly the same as how it runs now, except instead of a secondary thing that says this particular skill or whatever does more damage, it has a passive that lightning spells have a percentage that increases on level. You'll see this little square brackets bit come up a lot, and that just means percentage that increases on level. Chance to generate charged bolts on monster hit. So if I have, for example, level 20 charged bolt, my charged bolts will have a 20% chance to make more charged bolts when they hit monsters. So I could all invest in Charged Bolt and use Charged Bolt to make a big area of effect of lightning damage, or I could full invest in Charged Bolt, and when I cast other lightning spells, they will make Charged Bolts for me. So you're able to choose between, am I going wide, am I going narrow? That's going to still make more damage stuff as it hits things, and gives you a bit more flexibility in how it works. And this is the kind of formula that I use to build a lot of the other skills in the game, where it has the primary bit, the active bit, which hasn't really changed that much, but then a passive thing that interacts with the other skill tree in a different way, and that will choose how you're building out your character. So next, Static Field. So this is one where people just kind of put one in, spam a bunch of times at the start of a fight, and then forget about it. We've kept that same active, except that the amount that it's reducing it by scales with the level. So it'll start really low, and then you're like, oh, I can use maybe a little bit. But also it has a passive where all spells that the sorceress casts, or copies cast by the sorceress, have a chance to cast this spell on monster hit. So you could just put points into this and never have to toggle to Static Field, and it will kind of just passively increase your damage as it's doing stuff, because it just has a chance to cast it as you're spamming all of your stuff, right? So you could choose to have lots of faster cast rate, or you could choose to put points in a Static Field to try and see that great as it goes up, because when it's cast, the more points you have in it, both reduces more max HP and has more chance of being cast on monster hit. So you don't necessarily have to spam Static Field yourself, you could just invest in it for it to become a more automatic thing. Next, Telekinesis, which is largely unused. You can use it to pick up stuff. I have used it a few times to toggle to pick up stuff at a distance, because that can be kind of handy. And I wanted it to be a feeder skill that gives things knockback. So you can use it actively to knock back monsters, or passively, all spells have a chance to knock back. So you could put 20 into Telekinesis, and then all of your spells have a 20% chance to knock back, for example. Which I thought would be really interesting, because it meant that the active part you don't care about, but you're like, oh, the passive is actually really good, I'm going to put 20 into this. And it affects everything, rather than like this one thing gets more damage. And then that's like a protective thing in itself, where you're trying to knock stuff back to keep you alive. Next, we've got Nova. So Nova just kind of does damage in a ring around you. And I wanted to change it so it was more of a tech thing. So instead it's knockback, and it has chance to stun based on level percent in level distance in a radius. And the stun duration increases with the level as well. So the Nova distance increases with level, the stun distance increases per level, and the chance to stun increases per level. But also, you have a chance to cast this spell if hit by a monster attack, if you put points into this as well. So you could put heaps of points into this and never actually actively cast it, but when you're hit, it will stun the things near you, so you have a chance to survive and move away. But also, because it's a feeder spell for Thunderstorm, you'll have like 1% chance to cast this on when you're hit anyway. And then that's like a really good utility to just have one of. Like, that's not terrible. Or you could go, maybe I want more of this stun, I'm going to put more into this. And then next we've got Lightning. So Lightning, this is like kind of the core damage ability for the skill tree. And what you can see is we've added basically what Lightning Mastery does to this core spell instead. So the spell itself is the same. It's just a single line of damage that kind of shoots through. But the passive part of it is all lightning spells deal % extra maximum damage. So you could put 20 into this and use a different lightning spell, and that's fine. But like, this passive is the important part of it. Which then feeds into the next one, which is Chain Lightning. And Chain Lightning is the same, except it will bounce between X enemies, and the damage, the number of bounces increases as you level it up. But it has the passive of all lightning spells have a % chance to bounce to X targets. So you can choose between, do I use the lightning, that is the one target that does the lots of damage, has the passive that increases the maximum lightning damage, or do I use the Chain Lightning, which does bounce between a lot of enemies, but the passive for Chain Lightning can make my other stuff bounce. So the Chain Lightning passive can make the regular lightning bounce sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes. Or the Chain Lightning passive can make Charged Bolt bounce. So Charge Bolt passive is making extra charge bolts, and Chain Lightning is making the charge bolts bounce to extra targets after they've hit something. So you started to get an idea of how the Thunder Tree comes together. Next up is Teleport. So as I said earlier, Teleport is you put one into it and then you teleport forever. That's fine, you don't care about it. But I've added a passive that gives faster cast rate on level percent. So having 20 points in Teleport might actually be like a really helpful extra faster cast rate utility. Like, so there might actually be a decent advantage into putting 20 points in a Teleport instead of just one and forget. And then the next one is Thunderstorm. So Thunderstorm works the same way. It periodically sends a bolt from the sky to hit enemies, and the duration of Thunderstorm increases on level. But it has this extra passive effect where lightning spells have a chance to cast a copy of Chain Lightning on monster hit. So you could cast Chain Lightning, which has the % chance to cast a copy of Chain Lightning and bounce, right? So you would have your chain and it would fork, basically. But that goes for the same on anything. You could be casting your 1000 charged bolts and then have a chance to cast a copy of Chain Lightning on monster hit. So you just get projectiles everywhere. That's kind of the goal, right? And the next one is Energy Shield. So I wanted to redo entirely how Energy Shield does, because how Energy Shield works and its feeder skill isn't super transparent and doesn't make a lot of sense. What I wanted to do instead is it's kind of like an unstoppable mana drain on you to have it on. So you would gain a shield for a duration that increases with your level, but that shield reduces damage by 1% for each 1% of current mana. So if you have a full mana vial, you've not cast any spells, nothing, you have 100% damage reduction, you can't be hurt. But maximum mana is temporarily reduced, which is the duration of the spell, by 1% when struck. So if you're hit 100 times, you have 0 mana, and also you have the shield as 0 damage reduction. But so the maximum comes down, right? So the maximum and the amount that you've spent will deplete, right? But the shield itself only cares about how much mana you have, not the maximum. And then passive, you recover mana on monster kill. So this is something that you could use instead of Warmth. So you might not want to go into the fire tree. You could keep this. It also is your shield. So each of the 3 trees now has their own shield. So you might not necessarily want to split up amongst the 3, which I thought was an interesting utility. But there's also other things that you might want to split up amongst the 3. Like, for example, you might go into lightning for the passive knockback. You might go into lightning for casting extra copies, stuff like that. And so this is kind of an everything in one shield if you wanted to go all lightning. And then next we have Lightning Mastery. So all the 3 masteries are very, very similar. There are a bunch of different passive effects. And the lightning one is all enemies' lightning resistance is reduced based on their distance from you. So if they're standing on top of you, it's a much greater reduction than if they're really far away from you. And then lightning can chain to you as a target. So if I shoot out Chain Lightning, it could bounce to one thing. There might be only just a boss on the screen, and then it bounces back to me, and then it can bounce back to them as many times as it bounces left. But bouncing to me doesn't reduce the number of bounces, so it's free. But whenever lightning spells collide with me, I recover mana and health by a very small amount. But if I'm casting a million chain bolts, and then I teleport in front of them, I could recover heaps because they might all run through me, and then they all make the extra copies. And so that was kind of the idea. We wanted to try and build something that had the propensity to feel like you're doing more and more and more as it comes up. You're casting more copies, you're making more bounces, you're making more things happen. A lot of things going on the screen. And then as we get further into this, you'll see how some of these specific skills might overlap with the ones in the other trees in the way that the passives work, or the way that other things come together like that. So we now move into fire. So this is Firebolt. This is the one that you start off with. Fire projectile that deals damage to a single target. Nothing's changed there. But the passive, ignited monsters have level % chance to be affected by hit stun each second. Now, Ignite is a status that we're adding here, and a lot of the different spells have chance to ignite or do ignite. And what this does is when they're hit by the ignite tick damage, which is each second, they have a percentage chance to be affected by hit stun when that happens. So they would be briefly stunned, and which would cancel whatever they're doing, and then it would, and count again for the next second, and try again and try again. So with Firebolt, you could go all into the Firebolt to get higher chance of the hit stun, or to get more damage, or just focus on Firebolt or whatever. Like you're bouncing, putting skill points in the utility, or for the actual active ability itself. And for the next one, we've got Warmth. So mana regeneration is increased. That's pretty much stock standard, except the extra effect of this effect is increased by 1% for each ignited enemy. So if you are focusing more on the fire tree that Warmth is in, Warmth will be more beneficial for you as you have more ignited enemies, which means like you've just cast a bunch of spells, you've just ignited a bunch of people, you'll get more mana back quicker. Then we've got Inferno. So this is your big kind of flamethrower effect, which is largely unused. It's kind of whatever. But this passively gives all of your fire spells a chance to ignite, which suddenly, really, really good, right? You might go, oh, I care a lot about ignite. Burning down is how we're going to do everything. And the ignite damage itself is something like percentage health damage. And then that increases with your other things that increase fire damage. So maybe you think, oh, actually I go all into Inferno and then I just pick a spell that hits as many targets as possible. But before we get to the AoE stuff, we've got Blaze. I think Blaze would be a really, really fun addition to the game. What Blaze does is, it says spells that you cast a copy for free at a random target. So you'll get a buff, basically, and during that duration, all the spells that you cast a copy for free at a random target. So if I'm shooting a fireball at you, there's going to be a fireball shot at another random thing that's on the screen. And then the faster I'm casting things, I'm casting lots of copies and stuff like that. It can get pretty mayhem pretty quickly. But the passive, increase all of the level duration skills by level %. So all of the stuff that is at a duration will now last longer. So a lot of those lightning skills that we saw before will now last longer. As well as Blaze itself, which is a level duration spell, will last longer and copy things, for longer. And this one is a key one that I think is probably essential. It will show up in pretty much every build that you want to build with this set. But we will come back to it a little bit later on. Next, we've got Fireball. So this is another key interesting one that I think it's just the same skill itself, a fire projectile that explodes on hit, dealing area of effect damage. But the passive is all area of effect radiuses from your spells are increased by level %. So if I put 20 skill points into Fireball, that might be 20% increased radius on all of my AoE stuff. Now, that could be crazy. That could be really, really lame. We don't know until we test something like this, but I think having a passive on this that isn't just damage somewhere else, you can see the utility and how it is used in something else, is really interesting, and I think much more fun and exciting when you're trying to build a character like that. Like if you're using Meteor, you're like, okay, I now have a big area that I care about with the Meteor. Or for example, Blizzard, which is like normally a tiny little square, you might now have a really big Blizzard, and like stuff in the fire tree might become really, really important if you're playing a Blizzard sorceress. So I thought that was maybe an interesting way to go with this as well. And we'll see a bit more stuff like that later on. But for now, we've got Scorched Earth. So I took away Firewall completely, even though I do really like Firewall. It's really good damage, damage over time in a spot. But I wanted to remake part of this to be a mechanical fit for what I wanted the Fire Sorceress to be doing. So we've got Conjure Molten Lava on an area around the cursor, creating burning ground, damaging and igniting enemies standing on it for level duration. So you would basically kind of like what the Druid has with the steam vent things or whatever. It would just be like fire would pour out over this spot and it would stay there for a period of time, and then enemies on there take damage and are ignited. And then it has the passive, increase all of your resistances and move speed while you're standing on burning ground. Now, the lightning sorceress has teleport. The Fire Sorceress has Scorched Earth, where you just burn all the stuff in front of you and you run through it. And there's other, like Meteor will create burning ground as well and stuff like that, and you just are using this to like combo moving and creating a path for you as you cut through the game. Whereas Teleport is like dodge stuff, blast a lot of spells. Scorched Earth is like I'm cutting a path through everything. So I wanted to have a movement skill and a defensive skill in the way that they came together. And so this became kind of the core of that idea for the Fire Sorceress. Because then the next one is we got rid of enchant. It doesn't fit with the sorceress's core identity. We got rid of enchant. We now have engulf. You set yourself on fire. And what the way that engulf works is backwards compared to some of the other stuff. Its passive effect is the important thing, and its active doubles the passive effect for a period of time. So the passive effect is all fire spells deal level % extra damage, and the active is doubling that passive bonus. So this is basically what Fire Mastery was, except now you have the on-off thing where it's like, oh, I'm about to fight something, I have to make sure that this buff is on, so I have to double, and then you're like kind of managing how long that's going to last for, when do I have to reactivate it in the middle of a fight. And it's just flat extra fire damage. And then the next bit is Meteor. So Meteor is the same, you conjure the Meteor, it falls from the sky onto the cursor. It deals fire damage to enemies in the center, and it creates burning ground, and in an increasingly radius. And the passive copies cast of this ability has a level % chance to stun monsters in the center. So if you're casting and you've got Blaze, you're going to have 2 meteors crash. So one's going to be on your cursor, but one's going to be on a random monster. But the copy has a chance to stun monsters in the center. So you're focusing on the thing that you care about killing, and whatever the copy ends up on is going to help protect you from that thing running at you, is kind of the idea there. And then after that, we've got Fire Mastery. So this is similar to the Lightning Mastery. It gives passive ignite damage based on level %. Whenever you're standing on burning ground, you have that same kind of heal sustain. But then enemies standing on burning ground have their resistances lowered. So this not only just gives a bunch of damage boosts, but it also has like a gameplay mechanical idea boost where you're healing if you're standing on the burning ground that you're creating. So it's kind of like a synergy in design rather than just your shit does more damage. Like, oh, okay, sick, 20 points, all right? So we wanted to create something that made you feel like you were interacting with it in some way. And the last one, Hydra. So Hydra still summons a little guy. He sits there and he does things. The Hydra is there for a period of time that increases as you level up, but it casts copies of your other fire spells at random. Rather than just looking like it's shooting this tiny little fireball, it acts like a familiar that will cast your stuff. It could cast Meteor, it could cast Scorched Earth, it could cast Blaze on itself, so it will cast copies of its own things. So you could be casting Blaze, and then casting 2 Hydras, and then casting Meteor, which has copies, and the Hydra casts Blaze, and then the Hydra casts Meteor, which has 2 copies. All of a sudden, you have Meteors everywhere. Everything's going. There's lots of chaos. Everything's going on, which is kind of what I wanted. I wanted you to hit that top end, have Meteor, have Hydra, and all of a sudden you feel really, really powerful because you have a lot happening. And going from just having 1 Meteor to now having potentially 4, or all these other things happening at the same time, I thought would be like a much more satisfying conclusion to the skill tree because you actually feel yourself becoming ridiculously powerful. Putting Scorched Earth everywhere, you're stronger while you're on Scorched Earth, and you're, everything's burning, everyone's on fire, and there's meteors crashing everywhere, and people are stunned, and stuff like that. That was kind of the idea. And it has the passive of the faster cast rate, just for you, but also the Hydra. So the Hydra gets more powerful the more that you put into it. Or you can just put 1 in the Hydra, because when you cast the Hydra, it's casting your other spells, and their levels are important because it's the copies of that. So they cast your level 20, level 30, whatever Meteor, and you can then put all the other points in somewhere else. Or you can dump points into Hydra to get faster cast rate for you and the Hydra, which is another one of those, do I dump here, do I dump somewhere else? Is this, like, it's a synergy and design thing, because it is good without it. and it is good in a different way with it. And then next we have the Frost Tree, but we like Ignite, we have the way that Frozen works different. So normally something is frozen, when it dies it shatters, and that means it doesn't leave a corpse, which is not very exciting. I'm going to change it so that doesn't happen. Frozen doesn't automatically mean that the monster shatters on death. Frozen is a status that hits up to 3 stacks per hit. So the first stack is a slow, which is what you'll see when you try and freeze mobs that are immune to cold. They just kind of run a little bit slower. Second stack is an immobilize, which is the actual like frozen in place. And then the third stack would be added. They have a chance to shatter. So if they're immobilized and they hit constantly, by adding extra freeze stacks, they have more chances to shatter. And if they shatter, it's like an execute. And like no matter how big their health pool is, they will die. And so this is one way of getting through resistances. This is one way of speeding up how much damage it does or how fast it does by focusing on the status effect rather than like raw numbers, raw damage. And so like this is just really good for clearing mobs, not fighting bosses. So that might be the way that you choose to focus through that. But let's delve into some of the skills here. We've got Ice Bolt. So as you can see here, Ice Bolt hasn't changed at all if you're a Frozen Orb user. Active, fire a projectile that deals cold damage to one target. Passive, cold spells deal level % more damage. So if you're using Frost Orb in vanilla Diablo 2, Frost Orb says put 20 points in Ice Bolt because that's the only thing that gives me extra damage. And this is basically the same, except it could also feed into Blizzard, it could feed into anything else like that. And it works universally rather than just specifically for Frost Orb. I figured that would be a meaningful change, similar to what Lightning does, similar to what we were trying to do with the different masteries and moving it off and putting it somewhere else into a different key spot. It also means that you can go into 20 on Ice Bolt earlier on rather than specializing in other things if you really wanted to. It changes kind of how you want to build a tree. I thought that was an interesting and worthwhile change. Next we've got Frozen Armor. So there's 3 different armors in vanilla and you just pick one and you ignore the other 2. So we've changed that. We've made 2 meaningful ones and we've removed one for something completely different. So Frozen Armor, active, 4 level duration. Enemies that hit you have a % chance to freeze. And when you shatter enemies, you recover health. And then passive, when struck, you have a level % chance to cast a copy of Glacial Spike. So the idea here is we've got Frozen Armor, which heals you when you shatter stuff. And then when enemies hit you, they have a chance to freeze, which protects you a little bit. And then the other one is going to be different in a way that you would want to choose between the 2 of them. Rather than just, oh, this one's better. This one has more defense or whatever. But before we get to that one, we've got Frost Nova. So Frost Nova is you knock back. So Frost Nova is the big ring. You knock back and chance to freeze all enemies in the level distance radius. So the ring could get bigger as you level it up, and has a high chance to freeze all those enemies, but doesn't deal damage. It's just status. But as a passive, non-named enemies you have damaged have slower cast rate. So there's a few of these soft status effects that the Cold Tree has, where you make the enemies that you're fighting just worse in general. So it's kind of like more of a controlling aspect rather than a raw chaos and damage aspect like the other 2, which I thought would be an interesting angle to change how it works, because currently it's like I just slow everyone down, they struggle to get to me, but then also like Blizzard does like 14,000 damage or whatever. And so I thought that this would be a more interesting way to do it, because you can just freeze stuff and you can ignore it if you care about it, or you can drop something on it and kill it, and you can kind of keep running if you want to. We've got Wind Chill. So Glacial Spike and the 3 different tiers of it just felt like a regular one that didn't have AoE, and then 2 that did have AoE, and the third one just did more damage. So I'm like, okay, we're going to change this to more like a boost. So Wind Chill is a freezing wind blows across the entire map in the direction of the cursor. So if you're on a map like the Aria Summit or whatever, you're literally just walking in one direction the entire time, this is really good because you will run along there really, really fast. So you move faster in this direction, and enemies in that direction from you, so if you're running towards them, they're going to be in that direction from you, have a level % chance to be knocked back each second. So imagine like a really, really strong gust of wind constantly is buffering them down, and they have a chance to get knocked back, so they're not like really running. You can use it to just kind of blitz through a second if you just want to ignore everything. You can just run through here, or they're status from you and harder to attack you, and then you can be throwing your spells in their direction. Like if you throw Frost Orb at them, they'll be getting hit while they're getting knocked away from you. And then the passive is all enemies in the level distance area move % slower. So this would be really, really good for a lot of the really, really fast enemies that just want to sprint at you and deal tons of damage, and it's really, really stressful. That could give you more time. Like if you put 20 into this, like it would be really good, and it will give you more time to see them coming and be able to deal with those problems. Or you can just ignore that. You go, oh, I don't really need that, and that's fine. Like just 1 point in this is doing something, as well as letting you get access to the rest of the tree. But putting 20 in this also like is you recognizing you might have a weakness to this particular type of enemy, and then you can deal with that. Next, we've got Shiver Armor. So this is the other type of armor. For level duration, enemies that hit you have a % chance to freeze, and shattered enemies restore mana instead of health like the other one. And then passive when struck, chance to cast a copy of Frost Nova. So the two different ones, you're choosing between which spell you want it to cast when you're hit, as well as what resource you want to recover when you are shattering enemies. Whether you think, oh, I need more health here, or maybe I'm going to be casting a lot, or I have a faster cast build, I'm going to be needing mana constantly. So you're able to use that as a way to regenerate things. And you can put 20 points into Shiver Armor and use Shiver Armor as a way to recoup mana instead of using Warmth. So you might not want to diversify into the fire tree, and you can just go all in Frost, and then you can use this as a way to mitigate that. Next, we've got Glacial Spike. So Glacial Spike is a projectile that has a % chance to freeze enemies in an AoE. So pretty much the same as how it is, but it has the added passive of non-named enemies you have damaged have slower attack speed. So this could be particularly good against specific types of enemies. If you're knowingly going to be farming a particular thing with a particular character, you might want this, you might want slower walk speed, whatever. It's another thing that makes you more survivable without just I have more defense. It's you recognizing it as a specific thing that you're scared of and being able to build into dealing with that problem. Next, we've got Blizzard. So, create a level distance. So the size will scale as you level it up. Size Blizzard that deals cold damage 3 times a second for a duration. So duration of the Blizzard will also increase. And then it has the passive of frozen enemies take bonus damage. So this obviously will stack with the ice bolts, just a generic flat cold damage. But this is frozen, so immobilized, so it has 2 stacks. Enemies will take bonus damage. And so it's either they're going to shatter or we're going to actually kill them with the extra damage from Blizzard. So Blizzard is still a heavy hitter. And then next we've got Chilling Presence. So this is one where I was like, yeah, I really do want to change. I don't want a third armor type. I want to find something new and different. And what we've got here is a entirely passive ability. Cold spells create frozen ground in a radius that increases on level that has a level % chance to freeze enemies in the area when it's created. You move faster on frozen ground, and frozen enemies have a greater chance to shatter. So this, with the Chilling Wind, you can sprint really fast through an area as like you're putting your Frost Orb down. That's creating frozen ground in front of you. You're running through that area and just casting more and more orbs, creating more frozen ground, moving faster, freezing more enemies, having a higher chance to shatter more enemies. So this is the more damage-oriented part of it, but still freezing things is still tech that keeps you alive. So I think it'd be really powerful, but really interesting to see how that one would work out. And then next, obviously, we've got Frozen Orb. So the active ability is you conjure the orb, and it spirals out from you, but instead of just kind of being fixed and it's like always kind of ice bolts or whatever, it will randomly cast something from the 4 different other damage spells that we've got: Ice Bolt, Frost Nova, Ice Blast, Glacial Spike. So the Ice Blast is what it is before it became Chilling Wind. It would just be like a default, however many levels that is or whatever. And the Glacial Spike, and it's like, as you level them up, it casts more spells more times per second. And then it has the passive of shattered enemies have a % chance to cast a copy of Frozen Orb. So every time you shatter something, you have a chance of doubling up on your Frozen Orbs. It's going to be casting more and more and more, and the Frozen Orbs more and more and more and more and more. Fill up the screen with all of these copies of the spells that you're casting, which is kind of crazy. Especially when you consider something like Blaze. You go, Blaze, 2 Frozen Orbs. They kill something, that casts Frozen Orbs. I have lots of Frozen Orbs everywhere now. And I thought that would be like a really interesting way where you really do see the chaos in how much more things is happening as you're getting more powerful. And then the last one is Cold Mastery. So enemies are frozen for longer. For each second an enemy is immobilized, so not just frozen, but also knocked back or stunned. So like, for example, the wind that knocks things back will also do the same thing. You gain mana and health. So this is the same as the other 2 masteries. And then frozen enemies have their resistances lowered. So like the main thing is that in Diablo 2, you just encounter stuff that's immune to your element type, and you're like, well, why am I here? I can't deal with this problem. I wanted this to have, so it's like, you can break that, but it has to be under the circumstance that you create. So they might have to be on frozen ground, they might have to be on burning ground, or whatever. And you're building around being able to build this, like the exact circumstances to best deal with everything, which I thought was a really interesting way of doing it. But also each one gives you a little bit of survivability, gives you a little bit of tech, and deals with resistances a little bit, rather than just the Cold Master one's like just reduce resistances. It's like, okay, whatever. The other one's like just do more damage, like sure, bigger number better, or whatever. This does like a bunch of different things, which I think makes it more interesting in how the you feeling more powerful aspect works, rather than just getting numbers on it, which is, I do that from getting items. My skill tree should be independent of that. So our last little bit, I wanted to quickly run through some build ideas on how these different parts could combine and come together, so you have kind of an idea of what my overarching idea was when looking at these different things. So our first one is Chaos Sorceress. So Blaze copies spells that you cast and copies the Hydras when you cast them. So you have more Hydras. Hydras cast copies of your spells, which could include Blaze. And then your Meteor copies have a chance to stun. And Teleport gives faster cast rate. And Telekinesis gives a knockback passive. So you could have hundreds of Meteors and hundreds of stuns, which I thought would be like really fun and really interesting. And obviously, the original design for Diablo 2 had limitations of so many particles on the screen would slow the game down. But in Diablo 2 Resurrected, we don't have that problem. So we could actually just go big and ridiculous for some of this stuff, and it would be totally fine. Next one, Storm Sorceress. So Blaze copies spells cast, and Thunderstorm and Static Field cast copies on monster hit. Charge Bolt has a chance to make extra Charge Bolts on hit. So you cast thousands of Charge Bolts, which casts thousands of copies of your other spells. And then Lightning Mastery makes the bolts bounce towards you, healing you. So you're casting 100 things, and then also they're bouncing back towards you and can chain to you for free. And I thought that would be like a really interesting way to see, like, just, it's everywhere, it's chaos. There's so many lightning bolts going everywhere. You're healing, you're not healing, they're dying, you're alive, whatever. It's all happening. The next one is the biggest blizzard. So Fireball increases the AoE radius, and Blaze casts copies and increases the level duration. So the Blaze passive increases how long the blizzard will be around before it dissipates, and the Fireball passive increases how big the blizzard is going to be. So not only do you cast twice as many, but they're twice as large and they're twice as long. And then the Chilling Presence makes you move faster through the blizzards, and gives you a greater chance to shatter things on the frozen ground. So I really thought this would be a really cool way to play Blizzard instead of Frozen Orb. Whereas Blizzard now is kind of like, okay, I'm putting on the thing, I'm waiting my 4 seconds, am I running around, I'm casting on the Blizzard, and I'm waiting for it to finish before casting the next one. And Frost Orb kind of has the same problem. This one is more like, here's a Blizzard, here's a Blizzard, here's a Blizzard. They're all huge, they all overlap or whatever, and it's much more chaos, and I think much more interesting, well, to me at least. And the last one is an off-meta one, The off-meta one that we normally have is enchant, and then you like actually play an on-hit sorceress, which is really not that great. Instead, tank sorceress. So Scorched Earth increases all your resistances, and then ignites enemy, and then the Firebolt passive gives hit stun on ignited enemies, so you'll have people stunned in you. The max energy shield, because that gives you tons of damage resistance. Static field, warmth, inferno, and fire mastery will let you watch your enemies slowly burn to death. Like static field, when hit, reduces their max HP. Warmth will keep your mana up, so the max shield keeps you together. And then the Inferno, all this kind of stuff comes together. But you can also use the tech stuff like Wind Chill, Nova, or Telekinesis passive. And then you're knocking people back. You're also standing on the burning ground, and you're keeping them at arm's length however you want. And there's still like a bunch of other skills that you could plug into this to make it work. But it's like stacking all these tech ideas onto each other, all these kind of different things. And I thought that would also be like really fun, rather than just being like, oh, I cast the thing that's the biggest numbers. I thought this would be like an interesting different way of having an approach and looking at it. But this is already a very long video, and it was something that I had a lot of fun doing. I was really interested to come and see how I could put it all together, all these different synergies and how they would plug in and come together. If you think that this would be a fun version of the character to play, hit that like button, hit the comments, tell me if you would change something, if you think I've made something that's awful or uninteresting, or if you think it's really cool, and tell me which parts you liked about it, because we can workshop this, we can, we can figure it out, we can change, we can make it better. Or if you're a mod maker and you want to build this, or you want to work with me to try and build something for Diablo 2, I'm keen. I'm making this video because I can't do that. If I could do that, I would. I don't have the time or the brain. I'm the ideas and maths guy, unfortunately. But that's kind of it. I know this video ran a little bit longer than the stuff that I normally do, but I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to kind of challenge myself, see if I could do something like this, and I kind of wanted to share with you guys on the channel. So if you did watch this far, I do have a whole bunch of other stuff that's worth checking out. A lot of board game content. I do a bunch of Marvel Snap, Magic the Gathering stuff. That's also worth checking out. I'll put some buttons up here so you can have a look at that. And I would also really appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe and click all those other things and hit all the buttons and share it and hit up the comments and go and follow me on Twitter. All those ridiculous things, because it helps me out a lot. I'm trying to grow my channel a lot. Bit of a goal for me. But that's it. I hope you like maybe this foray into Diablo 2 stuff, maybe something different, something like, I don't know. But I hope to see you in the next one.